Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 369, and today's guest is Krenar Komoni, CEO and founder of Tive. The question, what led you down the path to start this company, is always an interesting one, as you never know what ultimately inspired the entrepreneur. It could be years of experience working within an industry, maybe it's a personal experience, or it could be a tremendous amount of research to find a problem that's worth solving. But in the case of Krenar and Tive, it could be your family, as the idea stems from his father-in-law's trucking company and the manual process of locating its drivers. From Krenar's point of view, it is a problem that could be fixed with the tracking system. Oh, and it's a problem that Krenar just happens to be uniquely qualified to solve based on his expertise and background for wireless connectivity, hardware, and chipsets. Fast forward to today, Tive is a leading provider of supply chain and logistics visibility technology. Trusted by over 900 customers, the company recently announced a $40 million Series C round of funding led by World Innovation Lab and Sageview Capital. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like advice for entrepreneurs on raising follow-on rounds of funding and why he's made it a habit of speaking with hundreds and hundreds of investors, Krenar's background story in terms of growing up in Kosovo and earlier entrepreneurial pursuits, plus how he ended up in Vermont for his senior year of high school, getting his career started at various startups working on RF engineering, memory products, and base stations, more about the background story of Tive and how the product evolved from GPS tracking to also include cargo temperature tracking, information about the logistics industry, how Krenar came up with the name, and why a 4-letter word mattered to him, Tive's early go-to-market strategy, and what he learned from being in the trenches of sales calls, the culture at Tive, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. It is hard to believe that we have over 350 episodes of the VentureFizz podcast. We have built up an amazing catalog of inspirational stories around building companies, and every episode includes lots of great advice to follow as well. If you haven't checked out our past interviews, go to venturefizz.com/podcast for the complete list. Oh, and one ask, please share the VentureFizz podcast with your friends and colleagues in the industry. I appreciate all of your support. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Krenar. Krenar, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Keith. Great seeing you.
I'm excited to talk to you. So one of your earliest investors in your company was Vivian Murto from Hyperplane. So when I was interviewing him, he's like, oh my God, you got to talk to Krenar. He has such an amazing story. So I'm excited to talk to you. And the timing of this podcast for you is perfect too, because you just announced your Series C round of funding. So there's a lot going on at Tive and what you've been building. And it's a Series C, which I'm noting that because I want to talk about fundraising, follow-on rounds. That's something that I think a lot of founders struggle with, because you can potentially get your pre-seed, seed, Series A. Now the B, the C rounds become more challenging and difficult in terms of the expectations from investors and what their metrics are and what they're looking for. So what advice would you have?
Oh, wow. We're diving right in. I love it.
Right. Let's go.
Yeah. So I think I'll just frame it in the way a founder and entrepreneur can think about each stage. Not so much in detail, but think of pre-seed, seed as your idea. It's an inception. You maybe got one customer or two customers. There's some product market fit, but you've really not hit it. And you have that freedom to pivot if necessary, but that's the pre-seed, seed. Then you get to A, you finally got a few customers, you're generating revenue, which is pretty exciting. And then you start seeing that you're growing. Like in our case, we went from 0 to 3 million when we raised A, and then we went from 3 to call it, maybe 4 million to almost 20. When we raised, we were close to between 15 and 20 when we raised the B round. And then we're raising C round, we're north of 40 million in revenue last year. So we're growing quite fast. And one thing that Series B investors look different from Series A is now if you put more fuel in this fire, is it going to be able to grow faster? And that's the first question. And then Series C is really around financials and metrics and really seeing the cash part of the business. Is this business something that can scale? Is it sustainable? Can it get to profitability? Is this business going to have great EBITDA margins as it scales and it grows? Is it sustainable? Is it a market leader? Is it a category leader in the space? There's a lot of other metrics that come into play in C compared to A and pre-seed and seed. But I would say financially being strong is very important for Series C.
What about finding, the Series C investors? There's capital in Boston, but maybe not as prevalent in, the Valley or New York. So that next stage capital, how did you go about finding the investors?
I mean, I'm a very focused on, I don't want to say volume, but I really like to talk to a lot of investors. So that's one thing that's maybe different from me than many other founders and entrepreneurs, regardless of the stage. And I built this muscle of talking to a lot of investors when we almost ran out of money back in 2019. In 2019, we had spent $5 million. We were now down to $20,000 in the bank. And we had,
Wow.
I
Okay.
had laid off half the company. We're 8 employees, and I had to figure out a way out. And the way out was to talk to 100, 150 investors. And I talked to 100, 150 investors, and I was able to raise a secured convertible note of $100,000 to get us out of the place we were in. But then since then, it was been growth nonstop, every month, every quarter. It's been pretty exciting. Now, that muscle of talking to a lot of investors, yeah, I built, so no matter what round, whether it's A1, B, or C that I've raised, I went and talked to a lot of folks. And the reason I did it primarily was to educate myself. So what happens is when they're in the Series C or B, when you talk to a lot of folks, you start seeing what they're really looking for, what they're interested in, what metrics matter. And you can't really get that by just talking to one person.
And to your point, okay, so when I was doing my research for this podcast, this was a stat from July of 2024 that you said that you had spoken to between 600 to 800 investors. So that's proof right there that you've had these conversations, and it's not something that just magically, organically happens. You need to be out there hustling and meeting people.
Yeah, absolutely. You're sending cold emails, you're asking entrepreneurs for intros. And what happens once this, like, call it book of investors builds, now every year, every 3 months, every 6 months, they actually reach out because they talk to you in Series A, they talk to you in C, now they want to know about B, they want to know about C. So you're constantly updating them. And I think that's also key to not spend a lot of time, but maybe call it a few hours a month. It'd be great to update investors so that they have a pulse in your business, or every 3 months.
I could spend all day talking about this topic. So this is my last
Me
question, I
too.
promise. so
I love
did
it.
you
I enjoy it a lot,
well,
actually.
did you have that regular email update to investors, your pipeline of, hey, this is what we accomplished this quarter, or monthly, or how often were you educating the pipeline of investors about your business?
The email wise, I educate the current investors, obviously every couple of months, every 3 months, on what's happening on our business. Not a cadence like that on any other investors. The cadence was more phone calls and Zoom calls and meetings. And then you always want to have a deck prepared. No matter what, every 3 months, you should update your deck. That is 5, 6 slides about your product, about your growth, about your customers. That way, if a conversation pops up, you'll be able to just like, oh, let me show you what's happening. Share screen. Here's our quarter. This is how much we grew. This is how many customers we added. And you don't need to just say things. You can actually show them, and then they see you're on top of metrics, and top of data, and top of everything.
That's great advice right there. Always update your deck.
Yeah, it's only 4 slides, 5 slides. Once every 3 months, I think you should do it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about your background story. So, where'd you grow up? What were you like as a kid?
I grew up in Kosovo. I don't know if you know where it is.
I do now. I looked.
Next to Albania, next to Macedonia, Greece, Montenegro, like that area of the world, ex-Yugoslavia. But I grew up in Kosovo. I came to the United States when I was 17 years old. Yeah, what I grew up, what I did as a kid, I loved soccer. I played a goalie. What else?
Yeah, wait. You had pro potential. You had pro potential as a goalie, from what I learned.
I had pro potential. I was playing in the Pristina Football Club. I had one of the best coaches for a goalie. He put me through the ringer. But and I was 16, I was like 15, 16. And my mom, she's no longer with us, but she's been an amazing influence in my life. And she asked me, Krenar, she's like, you could be a great goalkeeper. I'm positive of that. But what happens if something breaks in your body, or then you're out of commission and you cannot pursue a career? Do you want to use your brain, more? Do you want to use your body and physics, your body, like to build a career? And that's when I made the decision. I think I'm going to use my brain.
And you started working with computers pretty early on, and even worked for like a startup television station, from what I gathered.
We're going way back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've always just been working for startups. I've never worked for a big company. And since I was a kid, I always wanted to start companies. When I was 14, me and 3 other friends started this company, like building code for like programs for solving equations. And we would try and sell it to people at school. We started building websites. But the first startup that was, I would call it more larger company that I worked for was called KTV, which it's Koha Television, which stands like time here, Time TV. And it launched in year 2000. And I still remember I joined in June and we had to launch it by September. So I worked a lot on 3D animations that we did, a lot of video editing. It was just a fun time to launch a TV station. And I was pretty young. I was 16 years old.
All right, so how'd you end up at Norwich University in Northfield, Vermont?
How did I end up there? So I told my parents I really wanted to go to school in the United States. I think the United States school was much better. I think I really wanted to educate myself outside of the country. And one way out was to become an exchange student and come as an exchange student to the United States. And that was during high school. And it was the senior year of high school. So my parents found out the place on how I could apply, get like accepted to an exchange student program. And I got accepted in this exchange student program. I mean, I was going to end up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This is an interesting story. And I went to get my visa in Albania. Albania, yeah, in August of 2001. So put some time reference there. And when I went to Albania to get the visa in the U.S. Embassy, they said, from that day, everybody coming from Kosovo has to have an appointment. So I said, you know what? Okay, we have to go back. So we went back to Kosovo. The next appointment was going to be in September. But the family in Tulsa, Oklahoma said, it's too late. High school's not going to accept you. And I met this guy, Jonathan Hoffman, a long time ago in Kosovo. He came as a humanitarian to help. It was this company called Balkan Sunflowers. And I met him for 5 minutes and I told my friend, hey, do you remember this guy, Jonathan? Can I call him? Because I need help to find a host family. So he puts a news ad in Northfield News in Northfield, Vermont, that host family is needed. He finds a host family for me in Northfield, Vermont. And I go to get my visa in the U.S. Embassy on September 10, 2001. I get my visa at 4 p.m. Next day, I come home. I walk into the house at 3 p.m., which is like 9:15 a.m. here. Yeah. And I see the 9/11 happening. And I thought it was a movie. I couldn't believe it. But it was pretty tragic. And then my flights, everything got canceled. I came to the United States in November. And thankfully, Northfield High School still accepted me, which was awesome. And that's it. That's how I ended up in Northfield. And Norwich was right there. Same town.
Military academy, though. It's not an easy school.
It's not an easy school. Now, you could be a civilian or it could be a private, you could be in Corps of Cadets. So I went there, I did my application. This is also a funny way when I applied. I talked to the dean. She was amazing. And I showed all the work that I've done in math and like the 3D animations, everything. She really wanted me in school. And I said, I picked my majors. I picked astrophysics as one. And then I picked physics as 2, and I picked I forget what it was, mathematics or computer science as 3. I really wanted to study astrophysics. And then she's like, you know what, Krenar, why don't you change the number 1 to computer engineering? I'm like, why? She's like, well, we have scholarships there. I'm like, okay. So I picked computer engineering. And the other choice was, do you want to be a civilian or in Corps of Cadets? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what's the difference? Because I didn't know much. Like, she's like, well, do you want to wear a uniform every morning and go to school with a uniform or you don't? I was like, how about I just choose civilian? But some other friends of mine chose Corps of Cadets and they had to wake up at 5 a.m., which is, by the way, amazing because all the Corps of Cadets and civilians go to classroom together. And the discipline and leadership and everything I learned from that school has been immense for me as a human.
Yeah, I didn't know you could go as a civilian and have that type of experience. So that's something I just learned. All right. Then you went off to Tufts to do a lot more work in academia. So what'd you focus on there?
So at Norwich, I did two majors. I finished computer engineering and math. And then my undergrad was in computer science. And then when I went to Tufts, I really wanted to dive deeper into electronics. I had a great internship at this company called Bitwave Semiconductor. And I learned a lot about building chips, designing chips, and specifically radio frequency components of chips. And this was chips for 2G, 3G, 4G radios that go on the smartphone. And I'm like, I need to do my master's. I want to do my master's. I'm going to dive deeper into the actual chip. And the focus I had at Tufts, again, was electrical engineering master's, but it was around this thing called a mixer. And the mixer is when you have a phone or Wi-Fi, let's say your signal is at 2.4 gigahertz. I'm sure you know that. A lot of people know that number. But what it does, that mixes that very, very frequent signal and makes it down to like a megahertz or 100 kilohertz, and then turns it into ones and zeros so you and I can talk and turn that into data. But this thing is called a mixer that mixes the really high frequency down to low frequency, and I just worked on that and looked at what happens as the technology scales. I'm sure you know, like with NVIDIA chips at 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer. Back then it was 130, 250 nanometer technology. So I looked at what would happen to this technology as the transistor size scales down. That was my master's.
That's deep. And you stayed at Bitwave for a good chunk of time, right?
Yeah, I joined there as a junior in 2005 and stayed there all the way until 2010. Learned a lot.
Oh, okay. And then what did you do next after that?
After that, I worked with a few startups, dabbled around, worked for, I even started like a web design company that didn't pan out. I realized I was getting $5 an hour and shut it. But it was with this other friend that we were just trying something out. But the company, and I started a memory company, and I didn't start it, sorry. It was a co-founder, like worked for another guy, try to build memory products. That didn't pan out fully. And then worked for an MIT startup. This MIT professor that I had worked with at Bitwave, Joel Dawson, he calls me one day, and I was about to join my PhD program at Tufts. Literally 2 weeks from starting the PhD program. I had paused between master's and PhD, but I decided to go to PhD. 2 weeks before, he calls me, he's like, Krenar, we just raised money from the founder of Analog Devices, which is a really big firm in Boston, raised data, which is the MIT data center. And he's like, and we're going to build base stations, really high efficient base stations. I want you to come and be the first employee at a Devices. I'm like, oh my God, this is one of those offers you can't refuse. But I'm like, Joel, I have my PhD starting. So next week we met with my professor at Tufts. Obviously, Joel was a professor, and we figured out that I could potentially do a part-time PhD. And then I joined at a Devices full-time. That was a pretty amazing experience.
Well, what did you learn from that experience since you were like the first employee?
What did I learn from that experience? I learned a lot about on the, I would say, tech side of things, on how to take because it was still an idea from an MIT lab. And the idea was pretty amazing that you could change the power source of a amplifier and change it by how much the amplifier needs to output. That way you can be more efficient. But taking that idea and from the lab and working it to make it an actual product, that was quite a significant achievement. I would say that the company did, and to be part of that was actually quite amazing. It was a lot of work, a lot of testing, trying to miniaturize it, trying to turn it into a product. But I learned a lot there that sometimes, yes, you have an idea, but it takes a lot of work to make it into reality.
All right. So what'd you do next?
Next, I worked for another startup a little bit called Position Imaging, and that was more indoor tracking. They do a pretty awesome job with indoor tracking and using radio frequencies. And then after that, I started Tive.
All right, perfect segue. What led you down the path of starting your own company, Tive?
As I said, I always wanted to start 100% kind of my own company as a solo founder. And when I stumbled into this technology, I realized it was really very linked to the passion that I had, the drive that I had, what I wanted to do as a human. I knew wireless, as you could tell from my background. I knew chipsets, as you could tell from my background. And I really appreciated and loved wireless and connectivity. And the way I stumbled on it was through my wife and her father. Her father had a trucking company, which he retired last year. But he had a trucking company back in 2015 when I started the company. And every time I would go to his house, he would be on the phone trying to figure out where his truck drivers are. And I got pretty tired of it. I'm like, Alki, can't you just like buy a GPS tracker? He's like, there's so many people coming to my office. There's the distributor. I have to pay 30, 40, 50 bucks a month and I have to sign a contract. I'm like, you know what? How about I just build it for you for fun? So that's where I decided to make a GPS tracker literally for fun and install it in his trucks, and built a little script myself with PHP, MySQL, so you could see the trucks. And next thing I know, his friend who had 10 trucks, he wanted to track trucks. The other friend wanted to track trucks. I was tracking a bunch of trucks in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I started this in the basement of our house in Worcester. So I started tracking those trucks, but I realized there's, as I could see already, a lot of companies in telematics. And nobody had a really great user interface. So I really wanted to make some user interface that was amazing. But I saw that a company called Samsara started, and it was a great, with some great founders like ex-Meraki guys that started a similar space tracking trucks. But one time this truck driver, Tony, showed me this temperature sensor that was on the back of the truck. And I'm like, what does this thing do? He's like, well, they put it on top of the pallet because he was hauling fish, hauling seafood, hauling scallops. And at the end of the shipment, I said, how do they get the data? He said, they look at it and see what the temperature was. I'm like, that's crazy, because at the end of the shipment, that's when they look at the data. What's the point? It's too late. It's going to either be spoiled or it's going to be fine. There's like a binary decision. I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that tracker that I put in front of the tractor and I installed it on the CV radio of the truck, and I'm going to unplug it, put a battery, and put it on the back of the truck and put it on the back of the pallet. So I worked a lot on reducing the power consumption, making sure that the tracker lasts a long time. And the first tracker that we built back in 2015, 2016 was the longest lasting tracker in the market. It was more than 1 year in a battery life. And this was still with 2G, 3G. Worked a lot on that battery optimization. It was expensive. And then I realized that we need to make it more cost effective, get into more shipments. And since then, it's been ups and downs. But I would say since 2019, since that time when we had 20,000 in the bank, it's just been up and up.
Well, we just talked about your background story, and it's just like I hear what you built from, just having your father-in-law's problem that you recognize, like, I can solve it. And I just love founders that are uniquely qualified, because the overwhelming majority of people could not build what you built and just kind of throw it together and then all of a sudden recognize that this has longer term potential and build a company around it. So from what I gathered in my research, like nearly half of organizations have little to no visibility around their supply chain. So there's just movement that's happening and they have no idea where their shipments are, where their truckers are. Like, it just seems shocking to me that that is a reality.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know an exact number, whether it's 50%, 30%, 70%, but the reality is that is really like most companies, like the way we know our pizza is coming and on our way, maybe we know how many stops our Amazon is or how many Uber driver, like where the Uber driver is, which is the most accurately. Customers ship thousands and tens of thousands of shipments all over the world with values that are beyond imagination, sometimes $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 worth of value. And the only visibility they have is when a carrier, when a 3PL, when a customer tells them, oh, it arrived at this destination. Oh, it just left this destination. Oh, it arrived at another destination. Like you would think that everybody has a ping every 5 minutes or every hour of their ship. They don't. So probably more than half of the businesses don't have that at all. They just have milestones of achievements of their shipments. And I think that causes a lot of disruptions, that causes a lot of inefficiencies in the world. And then it causes a lot of if there's any disruption that's outside of your control, then suddenly you are on phone calls, you are getting the whole team involved on what's happening and trying to figure things out. And as you're making all those calls, if there's a large supply chain disruption, right? The folks that you're calling, they're busy with something else, and it's really difficult to really understand what is truly happening with your shipments.
How'd you come up with the name?
Oh, Tive. Pretty straightforward, Keith. I thought a lot about the name in the beginning, and the names that were coming up to my mind were similar to think of Dropbox or Dropcam or like two names, but I thought it's too much to remember two names. I need to figure out a company name that's just one word. And then I started looking at companies with 3 letters. Obviously, they're like architecture firms and law firms. So I'm like, forget 3 letters. Then 5, 6, I'm like, it's too much. But I looked at companies that are very successful around the world and you just remember their names. Uber, Lyft, Nike, Puma, Lego, Dell. I could keep going on and on and on. Fila, like it's 4 letters.
I never realized that. You're right. It's all 4 letters.
Ford, like the car, it's Ford. I'm trying. There's so many just that are 4 letters, and I'm like, I gotta come up with something with 4 letters. And literally driving, I was thinking of what the tracker does. This was the tracker that I had on a circuit board with wires hanging out. I'm like, it's active, it's intuitive, it's sensitive, and it's quantitative. And these are the words that were coming to my mind. And I was like, the thing that they have in common is the last 4 letters, which is Tive, Tive. Quantitative, sensitive, active, intuitive. I'm like, Tive, but nobody's going to call it Tive because high five, live, hive. I'm like, it's just going to be Tive. I'm not going to call it Tive. It's going to be Tive, and that's it.
Was the .com available?
That's a very good. So I bought Tive.io. I bought Tive.co. I don't think the other ones were available. .com was not. So on Series A, before the announcement, I'm like, I called my Series A investor, our event, Raju. I'm like, Raju, I think I got Tive.com. I can get it for, it was 300 grand. I said I could get it for 150. He's like, okay, let's do it. And the guy was in France, so I didn't know any French. He was in some South Riviera, France, like enjoying his life. He was just buying and selling domains. And my wife knows French because she lived in France for a semester. So my wife negotiated with him. It was pretty funny. Negotiated in French. And he made me buy another domain. I won't say which one it is. And then do an exchange. And that's what we did. I had lawyers involved, everything. It was pretty fun. But Tive.com was, I think, one of the best acquisitions ever.
I love the domain stories. Anytime I see a .com, I'm like, I bet you they had to acquire that at some point because everything is taken.
Yeah.
All right. So how did you get like your first customers? You talked about you were iterating on the product because there's hardware, there's software, there's user interface. How did you go about landing like your first customers? And, we talked about Vivian from Hyperplane, like getting your first investors.
Yeah. First customers, obviously the first one was the carriers, the truck drivers in Worcester, Mass. So they helped me quite a bit, just a lot of prototyping, testing, making sure I understand how the connectivity works, firmware bugs, all of that fixing. But the first, outside of carriers, customer, there were, I would say, 3. First one was Vanu. I don't know if you know Vanu Bose. He passed away.
I was going to say that's Bose. Yes. Mm-hmm. I remember Vanu.
Yeah. Sadly, he passed away super young. But he was a great entrepreneur, the son of Amar Bose, the Bose speakers. And he had this radio company. And when I went to meet him, I told him about an idea. He really appreciated it. He said, well, I have these solar panels that are going to Africa that are going to power these radio stations. Can we track those? And I'm like, sure. So I have it here actually framed. I want to show you something. This is the
purchase order.
First purchase order.
Yep.
For $2,200. So yeah, that was the first PO that we got. And then it was a company called Vetoquinol. They built pharma products for animals in Quebec. And I met them at a conference, pharma conference. They also issued a PO. A lot of bugs on my hardware. I I put them through a lot with the trackers that I had there, and I apologize here in this podcast, but it's okay. And then the real like big PO that we got was from Nokia, which is another crazy story. One of my software engineers met the head of manufacturing in an airport, told them about our idea. They were like, great. So I flew to Berlin and we signed, they gave us a PO for $25,000, $30,000. And with that PO, when I showed it to investors, they're like, oh, this is real. Let's invest in Tive. And this was end of 2016 when we got our first pre-seed money.
Wow, good for you. And I love stories like that where it just organically at an airport, one of your employees meet somebody and obviously did a good job pitching the idea to land them as a customer, or at least get those conversations started. Very cool. So how did you go to market? Like, how did you start to, like, you had to continue to build products. You needed manufacturing, you needed sales. Like, how did you get things started from that point on?
Obviously nothing happens overnight, and it's sometimes in the early stages of the business, there's the energy, call it the aura of the business. Where is it focused on? So when you get that first PO, all the energy now is let's build a product. Let's make these 150 units that work, that are scalable, that look real. We're literally 3D printing cases. We're painting them because they were off a little bit on color. We're painting them in our basement. We're coding, we're testing them. We're like putting them in a little packages, put them in a box. So all energy is going in the product. And then you do that and you're like, okay, now we have to focus on sales a little bit, and then back on product and back on sales. That pre-seed seed is really challenging and difficult, I would say, because you don't have a sales machine running, you don't have a product machine running, you're trying to do, and that pendulum has to work. But what we started building a small sales team, and this is 2017, 2018. But what I realized is we were not really closing a lot of deals. Maybe we were doing one pilot, call it proof of value, per month. And this was with a tracker that I built, an expensive one that lasted for more than a year in the battery, but you had to reuse it over and over again. You had to pay $250 for the tracker and then pay $50 a month to use it. So what we realized is, first, we were not getting a lot of pilots, so I had to make some leadership changes there, and then brought in what I learned. This may be advice for a lot of entrepreneurs and founders. I brought in young salespeople and kind of almost out of college. And then I sat down with them, you know what, this is not working. Let's start doing cold calls and cold emails. So we started doing hundreds of calls a week, hundreds of emails a week per rep, per SDR. In this case, these were sales development reps. And we started, instead of signing up one pilot a month, we were doing 2, 3, 4 pilots a month. And with SDRs, what I learned, and I was getting on these calls, I was listening to these calls. Think of the sales team, especially SDRs, like the spear of the company that can really sense what's happening in the world. And what I sensed is there's potentially some competition. I thought I had no competition. Then I sensed, hey, customers don't want to pay $250 a year per tracker and then $50 a month. They want something they can just put on a shipment and forget it. They pay once. They don't want to return it. If they can return it, they'll return it. If they can reuse it, they will. But it's not a choice they want to make. They just want to be able to put it on the shipment and go. And learned a lot from cold calls and being in the, call it, trenches with the SDR team. I would rewrite emails, change subject lines, check the open rate, rewrite something. We would write, like, one thing that worked really well was the appropriate person on the subject line. And we find the appropriate person that does what we wanted to do, who's involved with tracking or understanding where the shipments are. And then we would write, like, this is the world's best tracker. And like, you reach out and the CEO presidents of like Lamborghini and other companies, we would reply. It was pretty amazing. But I learned a lot on, like, if you, as a founder, sometimes entrepreneur, you're hesitant to do that. You think, oh, we should have a team that does this. You got to do it yourself in the beginning. And from that learning, then we shifted again back to product. We're like, okay, we got to build a really, really low cost tracker. So my VP of technology, Martin and I, we flew to China. We met 8 different manufacturers, and we're like, how do we build a 2G tracker? And then we realized 2G was phasing out. So we worked on a 5G, and we were the first in the world to release a single-use 5G tracker, and the first in the world to release a non-lithium based 5G tracker. And it's been quite a ride. But I would say to any founder, please get on cold calls early on, get to as many customer meetings early on, learn from customers, because you'll be surprised what's out there.
And also finding the right customer, right? Like, because you could go up top, but that's not on their radar, not their pain. But the people that are in the trenches sometimes are feeling the pain and need what you have to offer.
Yeah, I agree. It's not the CEO and CFO and COO that makes these decisions. It's the person that's on a call every day with carriers, with truckers, with their logistics companies, making sure that shipment's going from A to B. And they're the ones who are feeling the pain and the work, and that's an easy sell. Obviously not at $250, but that's where I learned also. And then you're like, oh, what's that target price? And they tell you, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to go and build it.
What was your focus in terms of vertical, right? Wouldn't this makes a lot of sense. Pharmaceutical companies would have their drugs getting shipped.
This is a very good question. And I think one of my board members, Raj, was like sequencing is very important, and sequencing on which verticals you pick, I think is very important too. And I think we've been very deliberate and smart in the way we approach that. But the way I learned about this is, you are correct. I went after pharma first because I was like, oh, pharma is easy. They need to track vaccines. They need temperatures, very important. But the regulatory requirements are pharma so big that you as a small company, you're either going to die trying or never get to where you're getting to. But then the other part was, how do I solve a problem that is, I would say, easier to sell and satisfies the masses quicker? And that was build the lowest cost tracker out there in the market. And that's what we really focused on. And the most sensitive vertical, I was like, if I can get into this vertical, I'll be able to get into any other vertical, is food. And produce shippers, food shippers, they're working on very, very thin margins. And the idea is, how do I build a tracker that a food customer would say yes to? Because after that, I can go on other verticals. And that's been, I think, a really, one of the best moves I would say that I've made as a CEO, as an entrepreneur for this company, is to go after that market first, build volume. We sell a lot of trackers. As you saw the news, we sold our second millionth tracker back in November of 2024, and we'll do our third million here in a few months. That's how fast we're growing. But then after food, the other verticals we saw was logistics companies that really need this. The other vertical is high value customers, electronics, servers, computers, laptops, HVACs. And then the other vertical is obviously life science. But now we have a new product that's going to come out. We've done a lot of work on ISO, on certifications, on security, like SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, all of that. Now we're ready for pharma more than ever before. And we already signed up a few pharma customers in 2024, which is very exciting. But that's how I would think of verticals. Either you focus on the masses low cost, or you go and you focus on a niche. But it's a pick that you got to make, and you got to make sure that you win, so that you have the chance to go to the other ones.
And you talked about this before, but it tracks where the location is, but the temperature data is super important. And I could see why, obviously, produce would be very interested in that, because if the temperature isn't correct for whatever they're shipping, that's going to be catastrophic.
And it's more than that. So the tracker is this one here. It tracks location better than, I would say, competition, because we also use Wi-Fi positioning, so we can sense from my past the routers in the room, and you can figure out what the location is inside this building. We use GPS and cellular, and then it measures temperature, measures humidity, so we could tell moisture inside of a trailer. It also measures the orientation of the shipment. So if you put this way, call it, and suddenly the pallet tilted, we'll be able to know. We also measure shock. So if something like somebody drops your shipment, we'll be able to know what has happened with it. And there's a light sensor here. so that if somebody opened the trailer or opened the doors, we'll be able to know for theft detection or tampering. And to be able to call it, another part I would say that we did the right thing of pick the right features, the minimalist features that do the most satisfaction to customer at the lowest cost. I think that's been a quite challenging thing to do, but we did it the right way.
Focus on the pain, focus on what they're going to pay money for. It's great to have all these features, benefits, but if they don't care, it's not going to add any value to you or sales. So you must, like, are there some like customer success stories that you could share of, like, because I'm just thinking, thefts, right? Somebody's all of a sudden they see your tracker is showing that this thing has been stolen and there's a whole shipment of, high value goods.
Oh, there's a lot of, every week, every couple of weeks, we have stories here at Tive. So there's theft. So theft stories, we had one with like Halloween candy being stolen in Mexico. That was one that was interesting. They were able to catch. The other one in Mexico was with meat. So like meat, let's call it steak inside a full trailer is quite expensive. Could be almost up to between $250,000 and $500,000. We caught that shipment and they were able to save the load. Then we had cases of very expensive TVs and very expensive smartphones. One was where a trailer had backed up with another trailer and they just opened the doors and they were moving stuff from one trailer to the next of these really expensive laptops from a really large company. And they were able to find them and catch them on the act while they were doing that. Then there's a lot of stories. There was one where they had opened it and people had walked in there and they were transporting. That's on theft. And then on produce, there's a lot of times where temperature goes up above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's supposed to be 32 and it stays there for more than 10, 20 minutes. We call the truck driver. They check the reefer settings, make sure that everything's correct. They lower it, and then suddenly we save a shipment. So we've done that many times. We've had pharma customers who didn't know what happened to their pallet to inside of an airport, and they were like scratching, and the airline was like, "We don't know where it is. We need to know." And then they were able to tell them exactly where it is, not just on the tarmac, but they had moved it inside of the warehouse, and they were able to find it and then make it on time. We had servers that they didn't know, the same story of really expensive servers in an airport. They didn't know where they were. They thought it got delivered, but it didn't get delivered. It didn't make it on the plane. Like, these things would cause a lot of phone calls, a lot of chaos, and a lot of work. And suddenly you can just pinpoint and make one phone call and solve the problem. It's pretty, I don't know. It's a no-brainer, I think, to have trackers on everything.
No-brainer.
But it's just more, that's why we're growing.
Well, to that point, right? So from what I read, you added 350 new customers in 2024, 50% year-over-year growth in 2023 and 2024, which all, kind of led into your Series C $40 million funding round. So what's the latest kind of state of the company, and looking ahead, what do you anticipate?
So you're right on the number of customers, and that's accelerating. Q3, we're adding 1.5 customers a day. Now we're at 1.7, 1.8 customers per day. Call it business day. These are new customers that are signing up. Like the hunger and the thirst for this is so real. With this new funding, we get to obviously scale the go-to-market function. I think it's pretty sizable now, so we don't have to overscale it, but we get to work on it, make it more productive, and do the things that we need to do on the go-to-market side. But most of the investments are really going to go on the product, and it's going to go on new software features that we're releasing, on new software applications that we're releasing, and new analytics, new modules that we're going to release on the software side. We just transitioned to tiers. We used to have kind of, I wouldn't call it tiers the way we would sell software, but finally we have now, hey, you have Essential, you have Plus, you have Premium. Here's the divisions between these tiers. This is what features you get with Essential. This is what features you get with Plus. This is what features you get with Premium. Took us a while to mature to this state. I mean, as a SaaS company, you're probably on day seven you have these things, but company that is kind of built on hardware and grown to where we are, we finally got that right. And the other part of the investment is going to go on new trackers that we're developing, which I can't talk about here, but they'll be coming in a few months.
How many employees do you have?
250.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think it might have been in the press release for the funding or something that I read that you're expecting profitability by 2026.
Oh yeah, no, that is the goal. The goal is to turn this company into a profitable business by mid 2026.
Quite the story. I mean, from the father-in-law problem to, building what is, becoming like an acre tech company in the Boston tech scene.
Yeah, sometimes I have to pinch myself, but I always, maybe it's just every founder entrepreneur has this, I don't know, but I always feel like we haven't done much. I just, I don't know.
It's almost like
It's, you want to do more.
well, people get caught up in the TechCrunch headlines of, oh, this company's been around for a year. They're already $1 billion valuation unicorn and they've raised so much money. Yet you've been at this for 10 years. And it's almost like you're finally at a stage where it's like, okay, now it's like really go time. We've got product market fit, customers that are just, signing up by the day, great employees at scale. And now it's like, okay, we're really going to take this to the next level.
Yeah. And that's why I think the work ahead is always bigger than the work behind, which I love. It's a new mountain to climb.
So what are the biggest lessons learned since building the company?
I would say the biggest lesson learned for me personally was the time when we struggled. And I think every company has struggles, right? Where points where you're about to give up or about to shut it down. And the biggest question that an entrepreneur or founder has to ask is, am I willing to continue this business even if it goes bankrupt and start it again? If you can answer that question as a yes, then keep going and never ever give up. And for me, it was a resounding yes, like yes. Even if this company goes bankrupt, I'm going to figure out a way to buy it from the investors for 10, 20 grand that I have in the bank and start it again, because I just can't. I believe in it so much. And I think that was the lesson. If you believe in something so much, please don't give up.
And like it's very defensible too. Like what you're building is very hard. It's hardware, but it's incredibly difficult what you've built, and it's going to continue to iterate, like you said, with next generation products. And then you've got so many customers now, so you've got such reach and scale. It's a very defensible company.
Yeah, the moat is time, and it's not just product. So having time as your moat, having product as your moat, and then culture. We have an amazing culture. I think that's one of our biggest moats. It's very, very defensible. I think we've built a great business.
I did want to talk about your culture because it's something that you do, talk about a lot, and things I've listened to or just reading through your website. It's a culture of transparency is the number one value in your company, which you started out this conversation sharing some data that I think most founders would probably be like, I'm not sharing my revenue numbers or something like that. So that just speaks volumes of you as a founder, that transparency it's a real thing, not just a thing that we talk about but don't actually do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been since day one. And when I started the company, this was like, we're talking 2015. I think that's when Ray Dalio was coming out with his principles book, or maybe even earlier, where he was talking about the principles of radical transparency and transparency in workplace with Bridgewater Associates. And for some reason, I've worked with a few other startups where maybe transparency wasn't 100% there. I resonated so much with what Ray Dalio was saying. I'm like, whatever company I build, I'm going to build it all the way to multi-billion-dollar business while keeping transparency as the first value. And I think we've done a great job at it. Everybody here knows what's happening with the business, what our revenue is, what our margins are, what our customers are. We're very open, and I think that you just get people to be more bought into the business that way.
I agree. And if it's transparent, when there are hard decisions like you had to make with the layoffs and $20,000 in the bank, it's disappointing for the employees because I'm sure they enjoy being part of the company, but not shocking. Not like they walked in and were blindsided that you were making some cuts. It was like, hey, this is, fortunately what we have to do.
I mean, they're always shocking no matter what. Those times are really difficult.
Sure.
But at least people knew that potentially something like this could be coming.
All right. What are 3 apps you can't live without? It can't be calendar, email, or Slack.
Oh my God. Todoist. I have it's a weird, but I love that app. Todoist.
Oh, yeah. You actually use it.
I use it. I actually use it.
Wow. I'm laughing because Scott Kirzner has this great, I don't know, he said this years ago on LinkedIn. He's like, step 1, download To-Do app. Step 2, load it up with to-dos. Step 3, never open a To-Do app again.
I use it. Not as frequent, but I use it quite a bit. So you said no ChatGPT, no. I mean, that's another app I use.
No, that's, you could talk about that. It's Slack, email, calendar.
Oh, okay. Yeah. ChatGPT I use quite a bit. That's like, I would say multiple times a day when something pops up, ask a question, and it's become really good. I'm actually curious about the deep research feature they just released. I don't know if it's available yet, but they said they're coming on in a few days. And then what else do I use a lot? My Dunkin' Donuts app.
I love it.
That's all right.
No one said that one yet. I love it. No one said that one yet. Okay. What about a podcast book recommendation for entrepreneurs?
There we go. Oh, podcast. I mean, I listen to quite a bit of books. There's one that I just listened to recently. Again, this is not about entrepreneurship. It's more general. I think you guys know Dale Carnegie. Probably there's been written, sold millions and millions of books. One book was How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a great book. When I read, actually, I was 16 years old. But one that I just wanted to reread recently was How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. It's a great book. Interviews hundreds and hundreds of people back then, from CEOs to doctors to people who stay at home, and the worries that they have and every day, and how 90% of the things that we think about or worry about actually never realize and then ever turn into reality. So there's no need to worry about things too much sometimes. And that's
great.
I actually would love people to read that, and it's a really good book. Dale Carnegie is great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to put that on my list because I didn't even know that book existed. I've listened to the How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I've had my kids listen to it because I was like, this is exactly like the playbook of what, you build relationships. It's not features and benefits, it's relationship building that's so key. So they're like, okay. But I think they got a lot out of it, so that would be good. Okay, outside of work, what do you like to do for fun?
Hang out with my kids. I love that. My son now and my daughter, they're growing. They're 12 and 9. And I love playing soccer. When the season comes, I think in a month here, I'm a goalkeeper, so I try to do that. I just started again last year, and it was a lot of fun.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Skiing, I love skiing, things like that. The Pinewood Derby, the little, the car for Boy Scouts. I'm going to be building that with my son this week.
All right.
He's going to build it.
Well, he's going to build it, but he's got a dad that actually can make it this thing like with rocket engines on the back.
Kind of. We got second place last year. Let's see if we can get first.
Well, good luck. That's awesome. Well, Krenar, thanks so much for taking the time to walk through your background story. Obviously, all the great things that you and the team are building at Tive, and all the best moving forward.
Thank you. Really good talking to you. Really enjoyed this.